mixed while the AC is on, really, if you're really trying to do it right. So the need for proper ventilation, proper, air conditioning really led me to like say, okay, like if I'm going to do this, I have to do it the right way. And I wanted to build a space that was worthy of the console, to be honest, because the prior space was cool. It was, it worked. I did a lot of great work there. It was vibey, but it wasn't really at the level of the work that I wanted to do and the clients that I wanted to serve. And it was kind of a funky basement with basement vibes. So what my objective was to have like a nice 68-degree temperature all the time with no sound, with nice AC. But it really was also to try to invest in the future of the studio as a business. And for me, I wanted to I had focused for a long time on building the studio business, and I had kind of ignored promoting my own engineering to some degree. And so I wanted to build the studio to work not just for my own projects and my own engineering clients, but also to make a more flexible space for guest producers, other engineers, and maybe eventually build up a staff of assistants and staff engineers who could then expand the business to operate more full-time. So, I was working 60 or 70 hours a week myself, but that's not sustainable forever. And you also are missing out on all those other hours on, nights and weekends, for example. So I wanted to build a commercial recording studio that was like way nicer than my really nice personal recording studio.
I totally get that. And therefore you could kind of detach yourself from, the space a tiny bit, meaning it's still yours, but, it could serve other people. It could just be like one of the great studios of New York, and you can work there when you need to work there, and you could take time out, and other people can work there if they have to.
Exactly.
That kind of like bigger picture mentality.
Exactly. And 3 years later, it's almost done. It took a lot more effort and investment and time than I think anybody could have anticipated, but I'm really proud to say that I feel like I have done the most that I could do in the space. I don't have 20-foot ceilings. I had a lot of headaches to deal with kind of working in a 120-year-old building, moving steam pipes, digging out the floor, doing, whole floating floor construction. The challenges of working in New York, too, which is a very strict and thorough regulatory environment for construction. It's expensive and time-consuming, and there's a lot of building code issues to deal with. And when you're building something the right way with permits, and engineers and stuff, it takes a lot of time. You gotta be thorough. You gotta be careful. You gotta be very deliberate. But I'm really proud to say that it really is going to be a great space, and I'm very proud of it.
When do you think it's going to be completed?
We're basically in the last several weeks of wiring and equipment integration, and I would say probably by March it will really be ready for kind of initial kind of proving itself, like getting the bugs out with a few early sessions.
That's amazing. What's one lesson that you'd want to impart on the listeners of like building a massive, like a proper studio space? What would be like the one takeaway that you learned from this experience?
Patience. Yeah. I mean, I want to say that there's, some golden rule about how to approach a project management endeavor like construction of a recording studio. And one could have, hours of discussion on that, but you have to be patient. You have to take your time. You have to kind of just be willing to let the process unfold and try to be responsive to the field conditions, because if you go into it thinking it's going to look like the renderings that you drew or your architect drew or your studio designer drew, you're completely wrong. Like, it will never look exactly that way. You have to adapt. You have to respond to the field conditions. You have to continuously revise the design as things change. You have to be somewhat flexible. But above all, you really have to be patient, because it just takes a long time. It's hard to do this kind of construction. And you have to be very attentive to the people who are building it to make sure they do it right.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. What were you doing in the interim, by the way? Like, how are you working?
Sure. So I had found some for the first 2 years of the project, I had found an alternative mix room setup, and I found basically just like a one-room space to set up like a mix suite. And I was mixing and mastering, and I would do some production work there. But around that time, I also started working regularly downtown at Jungle City, and I have a regular client who brings me there a couple days a week to track him. He's a pop R&B artist, and so I work with that person consistently, and that was really great to have like that consistent, regular work down there, and then being able to kind of fill in with other stuff, mostly mixing and mastering.
Nice. That's awesome. Tell me about your approach to mixing, because I listened to some of your mixes, before we jumped on the call, and they sound great.
Oh, awesome.
Do you have like a philosophy? Anything you like to do in particular?
Yeah, I mean, each song really is different, and I like to change it up song to song. Like I get part of the fun for me of engineering is the toys and the ability, and it doesn't have to be like a hardware toy. It could be a plugin. It could be, a piece of outboard gear. And I like experimenting with the different toys. And to me, like I have a blast when I'm trying out like a new compressor or trying out a new EQ. And each song, each genre does have its own reference points. You could think of it as like the canon in whatever that genre is. And most people, they kind of want their stuff to sound as good as the canon, right? Like as good as the stuff on the radio if it's pop, or if it's as good as like the famous classical records if you're a classical artist, or, make it sound like Miles Davis if you're a jazz person. You're like, there's kind of people all have references, right? So you have to have a certain amount of broad musicology and, listening experience and kind of understand the reference points for each genre and style. But then you also kind of have to have your own instrumentation associations. Like, what does a piano sound like? What does a guitar sound like in reality, right? Have you been in front of a Marshall stack and heard that? Have you been in front of a drum set and heard that, right?
Right.
And I mean, if I have a current approach that I could sort of describe, it's really I start with the vocal. If it's a vocal driven song, I will actually just mix the whole vocal like solo with nothing else going on. Like I'll put reverb, I'll EQ, compress, filter, DS, like to get a little reverb and delay going. I'll make the vocal sound really good to my ear. And then I'll go hunting for kind of whatever else is in the instrumental that I like. And I'll sort of stick that onto the vocal. And then I kind of repeat this process over and over until I've got the whole arrangement in.
Interesting.
I used to be the opposite. I used to be like, put the kick drum up, make the kick drum like the kick drum of God, like, and then
right.
like do it drums and rhythm section first. But I found that when it got time to put the vocal in after making the instrumental sound great, there was no room left.
No more room. Yeah.
And so now I go backwards. I'm vocal first, then maybe the bass, then maybe some drums, maybe a guitar, piano, or keyboard, or whatever. And now I can mix so much faster because I'm doing that, because for most vocal-oriented music, the voice really is the dominant instrument.
It's everything, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like the vocal and the bass, right? Like, what is that? What are the figured bass thing they would teach you in like music school? I don't know if you did this in like high school.
No, tell me.
Oh man, I can't even remember. No, forget about me.
Well, you're onto something though, which is the voice, the human voice is basically
I think it was called figure bass.
Figure bass.
I think it was called figure bass, and it was like a practice that we did when I was in AP music in high school. We would do like, you'd have a melody and you'd have to make a bass line that corresponded well with that melody. And so like you wouldn't really want parallel fifths. You wouldn't like stuff, you know what I mean? Stuff, it was like stuff like that. So like you're really honed in on like where the bass line is and the melody's going. So as you were, sorry.
No, that's related to, I think, what is so clear about the vocal and bass relationship is I'm thinking also not just from a musical standpoint, but also a frequency response and kind of energy distribution approach too. I'm thinking about, engineering is really, you're trying to fit energy into a container, and it's a container that is broad.
That's a great analogy.
Right? You're really trying to bottle it up. Bottle the lightning, There's probably like a liquor named Bottled Lightning or something. Moonshine, Bottled Lightning.
Yeah. Totally.
But, you have this container which has breadth, right, in terms of left and right, and it has front to back depth, and it has some amount of height, right? Some people think of height as frequency distribution, like bass is low, treble is high. But in addition to that, you have only so much headroom in any given frequency range, and you also have, of course, the overall headroom of the whatever the recording medium is. But the voice is basically a full range instrument, aside from like the deepest of low end, right? And so if you get your voice happy, and then you put your bass in underneath that, you've already got a full range mix. And then the rest of it is just the color and sort of the stuff that fills in around a bit. So that's helped me work faster and kind of have less revisions too, because the artist comes back, they hear their voice, sounds really nice and loud and, sounds crisp, to use a term that I hear a lot, like, and it's like, you make the artist happy, you've done a good job.
Nice. I love that. Do you have an approach to de-essing? Because I feel like de-essing is the most, I don't know, for me at least, it's like becoming the elusive part of mixing vocals. Like, that's probably the most difficult part for me is de-essing.
I have to say I kind of love and hate de-essing at the same time. And I hate it because it would be great if we didn't have to do it, because it's work to de-ess. It takes work to do it right so it doesn't sound lispy. I've now kind of established a workflow for de-essing where I will do initial harshness control and dynamic EQ as one of the first processing steps on a vocal. And I love like FabFilter Pro Q3, or I've used, I guess it's like UAD, Oxford Dynamic EQ is a great one too. And I'll try to control the harshness region a little bit around sort of 2K, 3K, 4K. And that's if I'm hearing that with that voice, right? Then after I've done some compression and done a little bit of sweetening, maybe I've controlled the mid-range a little bit too for proximity effect. Then I'll do several de-essers in series, and each one will target a different frequency range. The first one is usually additional harshness control around 2K, and I use the FabFilter Pro DS plugin, and I've set it into split band mode and all-around mode instead of vocal-only mode. So it's all-around and split band. So it's only controlling the gain of that narrow band, and I'll sweep that around until I hear like the most the shriekiest, harshest whistle sound, and then I'll just let it do its thing. And it's usually around 2K. Then I will do two more FabFilter Pro DSs. One is in full band mode around 6 or 7K if it's a male or female, and then the third one will actually be in split band mode around 9, 10, or 11K, depending on whether there's a lot of air in the vocal. And I find between kind of all of these different dynamic processes that I can get it under control.
Yeah, wow, that's so cool. So I've used 2 instances of the Pro DS, but I've never used 3 instances of the Pro DS. So maybe I'll have to try that out.
In addition to that, then I'll also do additional high frequency dynamic EQ. So something I do a lot of is I'll have a high shelf set to around 5K, and I'll actually set it to boost a little bit, maybe a dB or 2, but at the same time I will set it to attenuate dynamically a dB or 2 as well. So it basically is flat when the vocalist is loud, and then when the vocalist is softer or in the space between the phrases or at the tail end of phrases, it boosts the treble. And that really helps create a kind of more consistent tonality and presence to the voice, because a voice is a complete moving target. Like it's constantly a different pitch, constantly different
Great analogy
volume,
again.
constantly different timbre.
Right.
And then like at the very end, if I haven't gotten it right with this, I'll do like more clip gain of S's and automation of S's. But that's kind of, not that necessary unless you have like a really awful, something like that.
Yeah. I'll find like I'll do like a lot of processing just to get the DS right, and then there's still like one syllable that like you just didn't work with it. You know what I mean? So you have to like put it on a separate channel or just gain it up or down or something.
Yeah, I've become a big fan of clip based processing in Pro Tools, where you can do EQ to a specific clip, and I like that a lot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's I think maybe that came in 10 or 11, but you can have it's plug-in. You can either do audio suite processing, of course, which is old news. Everyone's been doing that. But the nice thing about clip-based processing is it's non-destructive. So you can play around with grabbing a syllable or a note that might have a particular timbral issue, and then tweak the EQ a little bit just